Welcome back to the Profitable Mindset Podcast. Today we're tackling something that might not be the most exciting topic, but it's absolutely essential for anyone who wants to build lasting wealth. Especially if you're actively trading or really into long-term investments, we're talking about managing debt.
Yeah, it's like a debt detox for your finances. Yeah. We're always hearing about detoxing our bodies, but our financial health, that needs just as much attention.
Okay, so let's dig into this debt detox. A lot of people, they see debt as this scary monster. Before we can even start talking about how to beat it, we have to understand it.
Exactly. And the first step in understanding debt, recognizing that not all debt is the same. There's a really important difference between good debt and bad debt, and it's not always obvious.
So can you break it down for our listeners? When is debt actually a good thing, and when is it holding us back?
Well, think of good debt like an investment. It's when you borrow strategically, and it actually has the potential to grow your net worth over time, like using a mortgage to buy a rental property. Yeah, you're taking on debt, but that property is bringing in income and probably going up in value.
So it's not just about being totally debt-free no matter what. It's about being smart about why you're borrowing. What about the flip side? What are some warning signs that we might be dealing with bad debt?
Bad debt basically drains your wealth without any real long-term benefits. And it usually comes with high interest rates that just eat away at your money. Think credit card balances from impulse buys or maybe personal loans for stuff you couldn't really afford.
Yeah, been there. Okay, so we've got good debt and bad debt. What's next in this debt detox?
Before you even start thinking about how to pay it off, you need to take a really honest look at your financial situation right now. That's where a debt audit comes in. It's like taking inventory of all the money you owe.
A debt audit. Sounds a little intimidating. How do we actually do this? Where do we even begin?
It's not as scary as it sounds. First, gather up every single thing you have about your debts. Loan adjustments, credit card statements, bills, invoices, anything that shows you owe money.
Got it. What are we looking for in those documents? What details should our listeners be paying attention to?
You want to write down some key details for each debt. Who you owe the money to, what kind of debt it is it a mortgage, student loan, credit card? Then the outstanding balance, the interest rate, the minimum monthly payment, and when it's due. Also, jot down any fees or penalties that come with the debt.
Okay, so we're making this super detailed list. What's the next step in the audit process?
Once you have it all down, it's time to categorize your debts. Group them by interest rates high, moderate, and low. This will help you see where you need to focus your repayment efforts. Then, calculate a few key debt metrics. This will really help you understand your overall financial position.
Wait, hold on. You're using some financial terms here. What are these key metrics, and why should our listeners care about them?
You're right. We don't want to lose anyone. Two important ones are your debt-to-income ratio and your weighted average interest rate. Debt-to-income ratio compares your monthly debt payments to your gross income. It basically tells you how much of your income is going towards paying off debt. And your weighted average interest rate. That gives you a clearer picture of how much your debt is really costing you, considering the interest rates of all your loans.
I see how this debt audit sets the stage for making better decisions about repayment. But we've only talked about what we owe. What about the things we own? Where do those fit in?
That's a great point. Debts are only one side of the story. To get a truly accurate picture of your financial health, you've got to do a net worth reality check. This means looking at your liabilities, what you owe, and comparing them to your assets, what you own.
Okay, so besides the money we owe, what exactly are we looking at when we talk about assets? What should our listeners be including here?
Assets are anything of value that you own. Your house, car, any investments, even valuable stuff you own personally. It's helpful to think about them as liquid assets and non-liquid assets. Liquid assets like money in the bank are things you can turn into cash quickly. Non-liquid assets like real estate are harder to convert to cash.
All right, so we've figured out our assets and our liabilities. How do we actually determine our net worth?
It's pretty simple. Subtract your total liabilities from your total assets. The number you get is your net worth. A positive net worth means you own more than you owe, and a negative one, well, you've got some work to do.
That can be an eye-opening moment for some people. But it's not just about knowing the number. What do we actually do with this net worth information?
Analyzing your net worth helps you see the big picture. Are most of your liabilities high-interest debt? Do you have enough liquid assets to cover things that come up suddenly? Is your net worth mostly tied up in things like real estate? Answering these questions helps you make smarter decisions about both debt and investment strategies.
I'm starting to see how understanding your net worth really puts you in control. Now let's talk about something that's super relevant for our listeners who are actively trading or investing. Risk. How does debt affect risk management, especially with the market always going up and down?
Debt and risk just go together. Debt makes your financial risk bigger, and if you're trading or investing, that risk is even higher because the markets are unpredictable.
So how can our listeners who are trading or investing manage debt responsibly without jeopardizing their finances? What are some key things to remember?
For traders, it often comes down to managing leverage. That's how much borrowed money you're using to make your buying power bigger. Leverage can boost your profits, sure, but it can also make losses much worse if the market moves against you.
Can you be more specific? What are some of the risks of leverage that traders really need to know about? What are some potential traps to watch out for?
One of the biggest risks is something called a margin call. This is when the value of your account drops too low and your broker demands you deposit more money or sell some of your positions to cover the shortfall. It can be a nightmare for traders who aren't ready for it. Then there's over-leveraging, which is taking on too much debt compared to your account balance. That can wipe out your capital really fast if the market does something unexpected.
So be smart about leverage and don't get caught in that trap. What about investors? How does debt play into managing risk for them?
For investors, debt is often used to buy assets like real estate or to make their portfolios bigger. The important thing is making sure that the returns on those investments are higher than the costs that come with the debt, like interest payments. Let's say you're using a mortgage to buy a rental property. You need to make sure that the rent you collect covers the mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, and all the other expenses.
So whether you're a trader or an investor, the takeaway is to use debt strategically. Understand both the potential upsides and downsides. Now, let's dive into some practical steps our listeners can take to manage their debt well and build a financial strategy that can handle risks.
One of the best ways to do this is by creating a debt hierarchy. This means figuring out which debts to prioritize based on things like interest rates and what could happen if you can't pay them back. Think of it as your strategic plan.
Okay, I like that. So what does a debt hierarchy actually look like? How should our listeners prioritize their debts?
Your top priority should be those debts with high interest rates, credit cards, payday loans, that kind of thing. These will cost you the most in the long run because of those super high interest rates. Next, focus on any debt that's tied to leverage, like margin loans. Those can be really risky if the market turns against you. Finally, you can address your long-term debt with low interest rates, mortgages, student loans. Those aren't as urgent and can be handled gradually while you focus on other financial goals.
That's a great framework. What else can our listeners do to build a debt strategy that's more resilient to risk? What other things should they be thinking about?
Keeping enough liquid assets is crucial. This means having enough cash you can get to easily, like in an emergency fund, to cover unexpected expenses or those margin calls we talked about. That way, you won't have to take on more debt or sell off assets at a loss.
Right, that emergency fund can be a lifesaver. Any other tips for navigating the world of debt and risk? What are some other strategies our listeners can use?
Diversifying your income streams is smart. If you only rely on income from trading or investing, that can be risky. Having other income sources, a side hustle or rental income, can give you a safety net. And of course, if you're involved in trading or investing, using hedging strategies is essential. These are techniques to protect you from bad market moves.
That makes sense. Now, let's talk about something that's super important for financial health. Budgeting. How does budgeting fit into managing debt and building wealth? How can it help us stay on track?
A good budget is like a roadmap for your money. It's not about depriving yourself. It's about being intentional with your money and making it work for you.
So how do we create a budget that actually works, especially when we're trying to pay off debt? What should our listeners keep in mind?
First, you need to be really clear about your current financial situation. This means tracking all your income from every source and putting your expenses into categories. You'll want to see which expenses are fixed, meaning they stay about the same, and which ones are variable and change from month to month.
Right. Knowing where your money is going is the first step to a good budget. What's next? How do we go from tracking to planning?
Next, you have to set your financial goals. Where do you want to be financially? Do you want to be completely debt-free? Do you want to invest more aggressively? Do you want to buy a house or retire early? Having clear goals gives you something to aim for and helps you stay motivated.
So it's like having a financial roadmap. We've tracked income and expenses and set goals. How do we create a budget that matches those goals, especially if we're trying to reduce debt? What are some practical things we can do?
A popular approach is the 50-30-20 rule. In a typical budget, this means 50% of your income goes to needs, 30% to wants, and 20% to savings. But when you're focused on paying off debt, you can change this up a bit.
Okay, so how would you tweak that 50-30-20 rule for someone who really wants to pay off their debt? How can we make it work for them?
Instead of putting 20% into savings, you could bump that up maybe to 30% or even 40% and put it towards debt payments. This might mean cutting back on some of the wants, those things you don't really need. But remember, it's all about reaching those financial goals.
Right, a little sacrifice now for a bigger payoff later. Cutting expenses can really free up cash for paying off debt. But what about making more money? Are there any strategies our listeners can use to boost their income and pay off that debt faster?
Of course, increasing your income can make a huge difference in how quickly you can get rid of debt. For people who are trading or investing, there's potential to increase your investment returns, which can then be used to pay off debt.
Okay, so let's talk strategy. What are some smart investment moves our listeners can make to generate more income for debt repayment? What are some approaches they could try?
Investing in assets that have high yields, like dividend stocks or REITs, can create a steady stream of passive income you can use to chip away at debt. Some traders might use specific trading strategies that aim for consistent profits, swing trading, or selling covered calls, for instance. The key is finding what works for you and fits your risk tolerance and investment goals.
So we can use our investments to make more money. What about outside of the markets? Are there other ways to boost income that our listeners could try?
Starting a side hustle is a great way to bring in some extra cash. There are tons of options these days: freelancing, e-commerce, driving for a ride-sharing service, you name it. Find something that uses your skills and interests and that could make decent money without taking over your life.
Lots of possibilities. Are there any other income streams that we might be forgetting about? Any hidden gems out there?
Don't forget about the power of passive income. This is income you earn without actively working for it. It's money that's working for you even when you're asleep. There are a bunch of ways to generate passive income, and using these strategies can really speed up your debt payoff.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. Give us some examples of passive income streams that our listeners could actually try. What are some options they could look into?
Rental properties are a classic example. If you have the money or can get a mortgage, owning a rental property can provide a steady flow of income. You can also look into royalties. If you're creative, you could create and sell digital products like ebooks or online courses and earn royalties on each sale. And then there's stuff like affiliate marketing, where you get paid a commission for promoting other people's products or services.
So many options. But before we get carried away with all these income streams, let's talk about how to actually use all this extra money to pay off debt. What's the best approach? How do we make sure this extra money is working for us?
That's where choosing the right debt repayment strategy comes in. Two popular methods are the snowball method and the avalanche method. Both can work well, but they work a little differently.
I've heard of these, but explain them. What are the main differences between the snowball and the avalanche? What are the pros and cons of each?
The snowball method focuses on paying off your smallest debts first, no matter the interest rate. The idea is to get those quick wins, build momentum, and stay motivated as you watch those debts disappear. It's a great method for people who need that psychological boost to stay on track.
So it's about that feeling of accomplishment. What about the avalanche method? How's it different?
The avalanche method is all about efficiency. You target the debts with the highest interest rates first, regardless of how much you owe. This way, you'll pay the least amount of interest overall, which saves you money in the long run.
So which method is better? Is one clearly the winner, or does it just depend on the person?
There's no one right answer. The best method depends on your own financial situation, your personality, and your goals. Some people find the quick wins of the snowball method super motivating, while others prefer the math-driven approach of the avalanche. Find what works for you.
Okay, so how does someone figure out which method is best for them? What should they consider? What questions should they ask themselves?
If you're the kind of person who needs those quick wins to stay motivated, the snowball method might be a better fit. If you're more focused on keeping costs down and you have the discipline to stick with it even without immediate results, the avalanche might be the way to go. It also depends on what your debts look like. If you've got lots of small debts, the snowball can help you clear those out quickly. If you've got one or two big debts with high interest rates, the avalanche might be more effective.
It sounds like a hybrid approach. Using parts of both methods could also work. Could our listeners consider that?
Absolutely. There's no rules saying you have to stick to just one method. You can adjust your approach to fit your needs. For instance, you could use the snowball method to knock out a few small debts at the beginning for that extra motivation, then switch to the avalanche to tackle those bigger balances with high interest rates.
I like that flexibility. It's about finding what works for you in your own situation. Now, let's talk about something that can make paying off debt a lot easier: automation. How can our listeners use technology to make this process simpler and less stressful?
Automation can be a game changer when it comes to managing your money, especially for paying off debt. Most banks and credit unions let you set up automatic payments. This guarantees you're never late with a payment, so you avoid late fees. You can also automate extra payments towards the debt you're focusing on. That way, you're always chipping away at it without even thinking about it.
That takes a lot of stress off. And it helps you stay consistent, even when life gets busy. Now, no matter what method you choose, tracking your progress is important, right? How can our listeners stay motivated and make sure they're on the right track? What are some tips for staying engaged with the process?
Absolutely. It's incredibly motivating to see those numbers moving in the right direction. There are great debt tracking apps out there: Mint, YNAB, Debt Payoff Planner. They help you visualize your progress. You can also just use a spreadsheet to track your balances, interest paid, and when you expect to be debt-free. And don't forget to celebrate those milestones. Each time you pay off a debt, no matter how small, take a moment to acknowledge that victory.
It's all about staying positive and recognizing those wins. Now, let's talk about something that's crucial for financial health, especially for those who are trading or investing: building an emergency fund. How does an emergency fund help us stay out of debt and protect our investments, especially when the market is going up and down?
An emergency fund is your safety net. It's there for those unexpected expenses: a medical bill, a car repair. If you lose your job without having to touch your investments, or even worse, take on high-interest debt, it's your cushion against those financial shocks.
Right. That emergency fund can stop a small financial hiccup from turning into a major crisis. How much should we aim to save in our emergency fund? Is there a magic number, or does it depend on our individual situations?
It really depends on your individual circumstances, but a good general rule is to have 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses saved. This should be enough to cover those essential costs like housing, utilities, food, and transportation if you lose your main source of income or if the market takes a dip.
That's a good target to aim for. Building an emergency fund is key, but for many of our listeners who are actively trading or investing, it can be tough to balance building that safety net with growing their investments. How do we prioritize both? How do we find that balance?
It's all about finding the right balance. If you're carrying high-interest debt, your first priority should be paying that down as quickly as possible. Those interest charges are eating away at your potential returns. Once that high-interest debt is under control, you can start putting more money into both your emergency fund and your investments.
So it's not an either situation. We can work on both at the same time. Now let's talk about something that can cause some anxiety and confusion for people who have worked hard to pay off debt, rebuilding credit. What are the main steps our listeners should take to improve their credit score after going through a debt detox?
The good news is you can definitely rebuild your credit, and it's super important if you want to get good loan terms and interest rates in the future. It's all about showing that you use credit responsibly over time.
Okay, so where do we start? What's the first thing our listeners should do if they want to rebuild their credit?
First, check your credit reports from all 3 credit bureaus: Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Make sure there are no mistakes or wrong information that could be hurting your score. Once you have those reports, you can start fixing any missed payments or collections accounts. If you have any debts that have gone to collections, you'll want to work on settling those as soon as you can.
So, clean up any past mistakes and make sure your credit report is accurate. What are some proactive steps our listeners can take to build a positive credit history? How can they start establishing a good track record?
A big factor in your credit score is your credit utilization ratio. This is how much of your available credit you're actually using. Try to keep this below 30%. That means paying down your credit card balances and not maxing out your cards. It's also super important to make all your payments on time. This consistent, responsible behavior shows lenders that you can handle credit well.
It's all about showing a pattern of responsible credit use. What are some other things our listeners can do to improve their credit scores? Any other tips or tricks they can use?
Adding positive credit accounts can also help. If you only have credit cards, think about getting an installment loan like a car loan or a personal loan to add to your credit mix. This shows lenders you can manage different types of credit responsibly. And if you're new to credit and don't have much history, a secured credit card is a good way to start building credit.
So we're rebuilding our credit, we're managing our debt responsibly. What about staying debt-free over the long term? What are some key habits that our listeners can develop to keep their financial independence and avoid falling back into that debt trap?
One of the most basic habits is living below your means. It sounds simple, but it's tough to do in our world today, where everyone's buying things all the time. It's about matching your spending to your values and your financial goals.
It's so easy to get caught up in trying to keep up with everyone else. How can our listeners resist that temptation and find a healthy balance between enjoying life and being financially responsible?
It's about being mindful of your spending and making sure your purchases match your values and goals. Ask yourself, do I really need this? Does it make me happy? Will it help me reach my financial goals? If you answer no to any of those questions, it's probably a good idea to skip it.
It's about making smart choices with your money instead of just mindlessly using your credit card. What are some other habits that can help our listeners stay debt-free? What can they do to build that financial discipline?
Automating your finances can be a game changer. Set up automatic transfers to your savings and investment accounts, automate your bill payments, and if you have any debt left, automate those payments too. This takes away the temptation to spend that money and helps you stay on track with your goals.
Like putting your finances on autopilot. Any other tips for keeping that financial discipline going? What else can help our listeners stay focused?
Don't underestimate the power of keeping track of your net worth. This means regularly calculating your assets minus your liabilities to see where you stand financially. Seeing those numbers get better can be really motivating, and it also helps you spot any potential problems early on. It's about staying on top of your finances and making informed choices.
It's like checking the heartbeat of your financial health. Now, let's talk about something that's particularly important for investors and traders, using leverage strategically. We talked about the risks earlier, but if used responsibly, can leverage actually help build wealth?
Absolutely. Leverage can be a powerful tool for making your wealth grow faster, but it takes careful planning and a good understanding of the risks involved. It's not something to jump into without thinking it through.
So when does it make sense to use leverage and when should we avoid it? What are some guidelines for our listeners?
One situation where leverage can be a good thing is when you're investing in assets that have a high chance of generating a strong return. For instance, if you're buying a rental property that you think will be a lot of rent, using a mortgage to finance the purchase could be a smart move. Leverage can also be useful for business owners who need money to grow their business. However, using leverage to pay for things you want, vacations or luxury items, is a bad idea. You should also avoid leverage when interest rates are high or when the market is volatile.
So it's about evaluating the potential benefits and downsides and making sure the potential rewards outweigh the risks. Now let's talk about margin calls, every trader's worst nightmare. How can our listeners avoid getting caught in a margin call spiral?
The best way to avoid margin calls is to use leverage carefully. Don't over-leverage your account and always have enough cash on hand to cover potential margin requirements. It's also helpful to keep a close eye on your positions and use stop-loss orders, which can limit your losses and lower the chances of a margin call. It's all about managing risk well.
So it's about staying informed, being ready for those market swings, and having a plan. Now, to wrap up this segment, let's think big picture. How can our listeners develop a mindset that helps them build wealth without falling into the debt trap? What are some key mindset shifts they can make?
One of the most important things is to shift your focus from spending to investing. Instead of using your money on things that lose value over time, cars, gadgets, and so on, focus on getting assets that generate income or go up in value, things like stocks, real estate, or even your own business.
It's about creating lasting wealth, not just collecting stuff. What other mindset shifts can help us on this path?
It's important to have a long-term view. Building wealth is a marathon, not a sprint. Don't get discouraged by short-term setbacks or market changes. Keep your eyes on your goals, stay disciplined with your money, and keep learning and growing. The more you know about personal finance and investing, the better you'll be at making smart choices and building a secure financial future.
So it's about patience, persistence, and always being willing to learn. And speaking of learning, let's keep this conversation going. We've talked a lot about the big picture of managing debt, creating budgets, and investing wisely. But let's get down to brass tacks for a minute. Sometimes those unexpected expenses pop up, even when we have the best intentions.
Oh, absolutely. Life happens, and those surprise expenses, they can mess with even the most well-planned budget. But the good news is there are some things we can do to stay on track.
Okay, so let's talk practical tips. What can our listeners do to cut back on their spending without feeling like they're missing out on life? How can we make those adjustments without feeling deprived?
You're right. It's all about finding that balance. A good strategy is to focus on your needs versus your wants. Take a look at your spending habits and see where you might be able to cut back without really sacrificing your quality of life.
Give us some concrete examples. What are some common areas where people tend to overspend without even realizing it? Where are those budget leaks hiding?
Dining out is a big one. It's so easy to fall into the habit of eating out several times a week, but those costs can really add up. Cooking at home more often can save you a ton of money. Another area is subscriptions. These days, we've got subscriptions for everything: entertainment, fitness, meal kits. Take a look at all your subscriptions and see if there are any you can cancel or maybe put on hold for a while.
Great tips. And it's not just about cutting back, right? We can also be more intentional about how we spend the money we do have. How can we stretch those dollars further?
Definitely. Look for ways to get the most value for your money. Compare prices for things like insurance, utilities, and other recurring expenses to see if you can get a better deal. Think about using coupons or discount codes when you're shopping online. Even those small changes can make a big difference in your savings over time.
It's all about being mindful and making those dollars work harder. Now let's talk about credit cards. They can be so convenient, but they can also lead to debt if you're not careful. How can our listeners use credit cards responsibly and avoid falling into that debt trap?
Credit cards can be helpful, but you need to be disciplined. One of the most important rules is to treat them like debit cards. Only charge what you can afford to pay off in full when the bill comes. This will help you avoid getting into that high-interest debt. It's about using credit cards strategically, not letting them use you.
Such a good rule of thumb. It's so easy to tell yourself, I'll just pay the minimum this month, and then that balance just keeps growing. What are some other ways to use credit cards wisely? How can we stay in control?
Another smart move is to use credit cards that give you rewards, cash back, travel points, stuff like that. But be careful. Don't let those rewards programs make you spend more than you normally would just to get those points. Think of the rewards as a bonus, not a reason to overspend.
Absolutely. Those rewards should be a nice perk, not a spending trigger. We've talked a lot about paying off debt, but what about making our money grow? Investing can feel intimidating, especially if you're not starting with a lot of money. What are some easy ways for our listeners to start building an investment portfolio, even if they're still paying off debt?
You don't have to be a financial expert to start investing. One of the simplest and most accessible ways is through index funds. These funds track a specific market index, like the S&P 500. They offer instant diversification, meaning you're spreading your money across lots of different companies, and they're usually low cost, which makes them perfect for beginners.
Okay, so index funds are a good place to start. What are some other options our listeners might consider as they build their portfolios? What are some other paths they can explore as they get more comfortable with investing?
Once you have a good foundation with index funds, you might think about adding individual stocks to your portfolio. But remember, investing in individual stocks requires more research and comes with more risk than index funds. It's crucial to do your homework and really understand what you're getting into.
It's all about finding the right balance between risk and potential reward. What about real estate? It can seem like a scary investment, but is it something that's realistic for people who are building wealth?
Real estate can be a fantastic investment, but it's not for everyone. It does require a pretty big upfront investment, and then there are the ongoing costs of owning property, like property taxes, insurance, and upkeep. It's important to think carefully about your financial situation and your investment goals before you jump into real estate.
So it's definitely an investment that requires some careful thought and planning. What about those of us who maybe aren't ready to dive into the stock market or buy a rental property? Are there other ways to make our money grow? Other things we can explore?
You bet. Never underestimate the power of investing in yourself. This could mean taking courses to learn new skills, going to workshops to learn new strategies, or investing in tools or resources that help you be more productive or boost your income. Investing in your own personal and professional growth can pay off big time.
I love that. It's not always about putting your money in the market. Sometimes the best investment you can make is in yourself. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about staying motivated on this journey to financial freedom. It can be a long road, and it's easy to get discouraged or lose sight of your goals. What advice do you have for our listeners who might be feeling overwhelmed or tempted to give up?
It's totally normal to feel overwhelmed sometimes, especially when you're dealing with debt or facing financial challenges. The key is to focus on those small wins. Every time you pay off a debt, no matter how small, celebrate that. And remember, it's not about being perfect, it's about making progress. Every step you take in the right direction is a win. Every step you take in the right direction is a win. And building on those wins, let's talk more about creating those streams of passive income that can really accelerate your progress towards financial freedom.
It's an exciting topic for sure. Passive income is like that dream of making money while you sleep or while you're off doing the things you love. But we've got to make it a reality. What are some specific ways our listeners can start building those passive income streams? We've touched on this before, but let's break it down even further.
Absolutely. We've talked about real estate, and it's a tried and true method. Owning rental properties provides consistent cash flow, plus you benefit from the property appreciating in value over time.
Real estate is great, but it does usually require a pretty hefty upfront investment. What about options for people who are just starting out and might not have a lot of capital? What are some passive income ideas that are a bit easier to get into?
The online world is a fantastic place to look for passive income opportunities. If you're a good writer, think about creating ebooks or online courses and selling them. If you're more on the tech side, maybe develop and sell software or apps. And if you're passionate about something, start a blog or a YouTube channel. You can make money from advertising, affiliate marketing, or even selling your own products or services.
So many options. The key seems to be finding something you're good at and enjoy, something that can generate income without you having to constantly work at it.
Exactly. It's all about playing to your strengths and creating systems that work for you, even when you're not actively working on them.
Now, we talked earlier about dividend-paying stocks as a potential way to boost income for paying off debt. But can those stocks also be a source of passive income?
They definitely can. Investing in dividend-paying stocks is a classic way to create passive income. When you own shares of a company that pays dividends, you're getting a piece of their profits regularly, usually every quarter.
So it's another way to make your money work for you, generating income even when you're not actively trading. What are some other passive income strategies that our listeners could look into?
Another option is peer-to-peer lending. This is where you lend money to individuals or small businesses through online platforms like Lending Club or Prosper. You earn interest on those loans, which creates passive income.
So many interesting possibilities. But it's not just about creating those passive income streams, right? We also need to manage that income wisely and make sure it's protected.
Right. Generating income is important, but you've got to make that income work for you and make sure it keeps growing.
So what are some smart ways to manage passive income? How can our listeners make sure they're getting the most out of it and safeguarding their earnings?
One of the best things you can do is reinvest that passive income. This way, your returns compound and your wealth can really start to grow. You can reinvest those earnings back into the same passive income streams, like buying more rental properties or expanding your online business, or you can diversify into other investments.
Reinvesting is a powerful way to grow your wealth over the long term. Any other tips for managing that passive income well?
And keep in mind that passive income isn't always completely passive. A lot of passive income streams still take some effort, especially when you're first getting them set up. Be ready to put in some work to get your passive income sources going and keep them running smoothly, even though the work might become less over time.
It's not a magic get-rich-quick scheme. It takes effort and dedication to build passive income that lasts. As we wrap up, let's come back to a point we've been talking about throughout this episode: the importance of mindset. Why is mindset so essential on the road to financial freedom?
Our beliefs and attitudes about money can have a huge impact on the financial decisions we make and how successful we are. If you think money is scarce or that you're just not good with money, those beliefs can actually make those things come true.
So how can we change those negative beliefs and start thinking about money in a more positive and empowered way? What are some things our listeners can do to change their thinking about money?
Start by becoming aware of your thoughts and feelings about money. Think about the messages you got about money when you were growing up. What limiting beliefs might be holding you back? Once you figure out what those negative beliefs are, you can start to challenge them and see things differently.
It's like retraining your brain to think about money in a way that helps you succeed. What are some practical ways to challenge those negative beliefs and start building a more positive mindset about money?
Affirmations can be really powerful. Try starting each day by saying positive statements about your financial goals and your ability to reach them. Surround yourself with positive influences, to read books, listen to podcasts, connect with people who have a healthy and abundant mindset about money.
It's about creating an environment that nourishes your financial growth. But what about those times when fear or doubt creep in? How do we deal with those emotions? How do we stop them from sabotaging our progress?
Remember, fear and self-doubt are normal, but you don't have to let them run the show. When you feel those things coming up, just acknowledge them, but don't judge yourself for feeling them. Then, shift your focus back to your goals and the steps you're taking to reach them.
Take action, even when you're afraid. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. We've covered a lot of ground understanding different types of debt, creating budgets, exploring smart investment strategies, building a resilient mindset, and creating passive income streams. I'm so grateful for the insights you've shared with our listeners today.
Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed sharing these strategies with your listeners.
And to our listeners, remember, you have the power to create the financial future you want. Start small, stay committed to your goals, and never stop learning.